It's been over 67 years since Albert Einstein died, and just hours later, someone took his brain. He never wanted to be worshipped, and especially not dissected. But science had other plans. Subscribe, quote. If hidden science and human stories fascinate you, hit subscribe. We explore the minds that changed the world and what happened after. On April 18, 1955, Albert Einstein died at Princeton Hospital from an abdominal aortic aneurysm. He was 76 years old. It's just before his death. He told his son, "I want to go when I'm old," and worn out like a pair of shoes. But even in death, Einstein wouldn't get a quiet rest. According to his death certificate, he was cremated and his ashes scattered in an undisclosed location. But there is no record of that happening. Instead, his family gathered around the body one last time, said their goodbyes, and requested the hospital not preserve any body parts, specifically mentioning they did not want a brain or spinal cord dissection. It was the beginning of a very long night for the Princeton hospital staff. Einstein's son Haynes helped carry out the funeral arrangements, while his widow, Elsa, stayed at the hospital with a close friend, around 11 p.m. The family left the hospital without saying goodbye to the staff who'd been looking after their father and husband. Maybe they assumed that everything would be as they requested. Maybe they thought this was the end of the story. But the hospital pathologist, Dr. Thomas Stoltz Harvey, didn't think so. Dr. Harvey had heard about the legend of Einstein before he arrived at the hospital. In fact, he'd applied for a job at the Institute for Advanced Study, where Einstein taught, because he knew there was a chance he might be able to dissect Einstein as brained. And now, after a night of waiting, he had his chance. While everyone was gone, he went into the room, retrieved the brain, and then spent 2 hours carefully preserving it in a chemical solution. Then he photographed it, sliced it into over 240 pieces, put those pieces back in different containers, labeled them all, and finally sent the jars to a colleague at Yale University. He acted alone, without telling anyone at the hospital, and without telling the family, and without telling the outside world. Years later, he said he did it all for science. Now, his colleagues could study the brain of one of the most intelligent people ever to live, and maybe discover what made him such a genius. So what did they find? Well, they found some interesting things, but nothing definitive. In 2001, researchers looked at Einstein's brain slices under a microscope. They focused on the parietal lobes, the area of the brain responsible for math and spatial reasoning. They compared Einstein's brain to the brains of both a genius and an average person.
Nice.
They found that Einstein's parietal lobes were 15% wider than average, with more connections between neurons, which may have helped him complete complex tasks and process information quickly. They also discovered that Einstein had an unusual Sylvian fissure, a groove in the side of the brain that scientists believe helps pack more neurons into a small space. When they compared Einstein's brain to other geniuses, they noticed that they too had this unusual fissure. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it was the reason why they were smart. It's just something they found. It's hard to know why exactly they became famous for discovering these things. It's not like it would change your life to know that the shape of your Sylvian fissure might affect your smarts. I guess if you were really desperate for a fun fact, you could whip that one out at your next dinner party. But generally speaking, these discoveries don't have much real-world application, at least not yet. But that isn't the point. The point is to understand how people think, to look inside the minds of geniuses and try and understand how they worked, how they came up with their ideas and theories. Maybe someday we will figure out what makes a genius, but it probably won't be because we have some guy's sliced up brain in a jar somewhere. After Einstein died, his brain traveled all over the country. Pathologists took pictures of it, drew diagrams, sectioned it. Researchers sent it to other researchers. It was shipped in jars, sometimes in pieces. It was even mailed at one point. Can you imagine getting a package in the mail and opening it to find someone else's brain inside? That's what happened to one researcher, and that's not even the weirdest part. For decades, scientists argued over whether they should study Einstein's brain, and if so, what they should do with it. They wondered if they should slice it, freeze it, store it in a box. Some people wanted to see if they could clone the brain. Others worried that if they sliced it, they'd damage something important. There was even a proposal to turn it into a soup and send samples to different labs. And some scientists thought that the only way to do this right was to put the brain back in the body and reanimate it. Which is like, I'm sorry, does anyone remember Frankenstein? Because we already know that doesn't work. It's like we literally tried it a century ago and we learned our lesson. Can't bring someone back to life just because you have some of their cells. Also, it's just rude. And by the way, Albert Einstein didn't die in 1955. According to the US government, he died in 1950. See, after he died. Dr. Harvey wrote down the date of death on the bottom of a jar containing a piece of Einstein's brain. He put the brain in a jar with formaldehyde and gave it to a colleague at Yale University. But when that colleague opened the jar to look at the brain, he noticed that it had started to liquefy. Concerned that he had mislabeled the jar, he called Dr. Harvey to ask if maybe the brain wasn't kept refrigerated. "Oh no," replied Dr. Harvey. "I put the brain in the refrigerator of my home. I take it out every Sunday and put it in a 55-gallon drum full of formaldehyde. By Monday, it looks as fresh as the day I took it out." This colleague was pretty grossed out, but he wasn't the only one. In the following years, several pathologists refused to touch Einstein's brain. One scientist even threatened to resign if it was brought to his lab. Eventually, the brain was stored in an Ohio University research lab until it was deemed too decayed to be useful. But even before it became too gross to study, scientists had stopped trying to study it. Why? Well, first of all, we have to consider Einstein. What would he have thought about this? How would he have felt knowing that his brain was being passed around like an artifact, like a souvenir? He once said, "I do not believe in the immortality of the individual. I think we are like the Greeks in the belief that death is the end," he said. "I would rather have people say of me, he is not a bit of a nuisance. He is dead," he said, than to have them say of me, he is still around, the old nuisance. Einstein liked to poke fun at himself, but he was serious when it came to his privacy and the privacy of others. He never wanted to be worshipped, and especially not dissected. He would have liked the idea of people keeping his brain in a jar on a shelf like some kind of trophy. Honestly, he didn't need to say anything. Scientists knew he wouldn't have liked it. It's common sense. But that's not the only reason why they stopped studying his brain. There was also the little matter of ethics. For the longest time, it was okay to remove and sell body parts without telling anyone. But eventually people started asking questions. Families wanted to know what happened to their loved ones' remains, wanted to know if their bodies were used to make money. I don't blame them. If I'd lost someone, I'd want to know what happened to their body. I wouldn't want anyone selling their organs to make a profit. Today, we know that Einstein's brain is gone. But where it went, or what happened to it, well, nobody knows. In the end, we learned more about science ethics than about Einstein's intelligence. Sometimes the pursuit of knowledge crosses the line, even when chasing greatness. Einstein once said, "The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. One cannot help but be in awe when he contemplates the mysteries of eternity, of life, of the marvelous structure of reality. The safe path is the one which leaves no doubt as to the rightness of our aims. Yet such a path leads to a very poor intellectual diet. And maybe that's the best way to remember him, not by dissecting his brain, but by reading his work, by learning more about the universe." Subscribe prompt. If this story opened your mind, hit subscribe. Because at the Science Stream, we explore not just how science works, but what it costs.